response to this? Up to you. Great, I see people adding. We got expression, freedom, exclamation point, identity. Thank you.
We're still waiting on a few people, so we'll probably get started at about 5 past, if not sooner.
Oh, so continuing,
I was trying to write continuing continuum.
Oh, fantastic.
But
Continuing continuum, ownership.
yeah, I got cut off.
The whiteboard is very temperamental.
It is.
Oh, I see fluid. Thank you all for adding things as you're coming in. Appreciate you.
Intersectional, that's a great one.
Shifting over time, responsive, personal. Audrey, they got that continuum under continuing. You can also add little stamps to the whiteboard if you want to give a little love to an answer. You can a little heart or a little star or an arrow. I don't know. I wonder who chose these. Okay, I see your own. Thank you.
Oh, I like responsive.
Interesting.
We'd also like to invite anyone who doesn't already have their pronouns attached to their Zoom name to add them. You can edit your name by highlighting your little window and clicking the 3 dots, and then you can click rename. Anya, are you decorating the whiteboard?
I was.
Take a screenshot of this before we close it also.
Oh, storied. There's some tasty words. Thank you all.
All right. We'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll get started. I can't see as much when I have the whiteboard up. How many people do we have in the room?
We have, including us and Cindy, we have 8, and then us and Cindy, who I think is going to leave it up to us. So maybe we just start with our intros, and then if people come in, they come in.
Great. I am going to take a screenshot of the whiteboard and then I'm going to close it. All right, whiteboard going away. Cool.
What?
Welcome, everybody. We are going to open our slideshow where I, again, will not be able to see anybody. Probably help if I did screen share before I opened it.
And thank you all for joining us on this Saturday. I hope it's been good so far if you've caught any other workshops.
All right. I think we're good to get started. Welcome to GenderWise. This is a workshop created and facilitated by myself, Rachel, and Anya. For today's agenda, we're going to do some introductions, go over ground rules. We're going to have a vocabulary/art activity. We'll have a gallery walk, and then we're going to practice some stuff. So a little bit about us. GenderWise Trainings, founded by us, is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongings workshop series and consulting organization that focuses on gender diversity awareness and active allyship skills for educators, employers, and caregivers. We're based in Brooklyn, but we work globally, both in person and on Zoom. And then to introduce ourselves individually, my name is Rachel. I'm a queer, neurodiverse teaching artist, facilitator, and administrator. I work with New York City Children's Theater, and I am also the assistant director for New Country Pride Camp, which is a summer camp for queer kids. And yeah, I live in Brooklyn with my wife, my dog, and my cat.
Rachel, I can see them in your signature, but what are your pronouns?
Oh my God, Anya, thank you for asking. My pronouns are they, them.
Thank you. It's just so great to know how I can refer to you. Okay, so my name's Anya. My pronouns are also they, them. I am a clown, a theater maker, and a teaching artist based in New York. Most of my creative work focuses on the queer and trans and gender diverse communities and around like queer joy and representation. And I teach for a bunch of places in New York. So maybe too many places in New York. My schedule is very complicated, but so nice to have you all. I'm really grateful that you're here. Before we start, we are meeting on Zoom, but we did want to do a land acknowledgement. This is one based, I guess, out of New York. So this workshop came out of work that Rachel and I did in the applied theater program at the City University of New York. That university is based in Manhattan, which is on the Lenape island of Mannahatta in Lenapehoking, the Lenape homeland. And as we start, we pay respect to Lenape peoples past, present, and future, their continuing presence in the homeland, and their presence in the Lenape diaspora. For this workshop, we feel like it's especially important to acknowledge Indigenous caretakers of the land, because as we sort of expand our understandings of gender, we draw from the sort of past use of gender around the world, and also understandings from Indigenous traditions that continue to exist and to inspire our evolving and expanding understanding of gender. So here we are, gender. For this workshop, there are some ground rules. Rachel, what are they?
So these are ground rules that we like to bring into the space, both when we're facilitating in person and when we're facilitating on Zoom. So I'm going to run through them, explain them, and then if anyone has any questions or has any other boundaries that they would like to bring into the space, we can do that. Also, I forgot to mention, but Cindy is our wonderful host, and she is going to keep an eye on the chat. So if at any point anyone needs to get our attention, Cindy will notice it and let us know, because I'm in full screen and I can't see anything except for a few faces. So for our ground rules, what's said here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. There might be an instance where somebody might share something personal when we are going through this workshop. And if that is the case, we are going to keep people's personal information personal, but we're going to take those lessons that we learn and take them with us into the world. Move forward, move back is our invitation for people who maybe are a little bit quieter and less participatory. This is your invitation to be a little bolder and speak up when we're having conversations. And if you're somebody who participates a lot, we love that. You're our favorite, but be mindful of the space that you're taking up. Challenge the idea, not the person. We're talking about some topics that might be very sensitive to some people, and we're all coming from different backgrounds, and we're all coming into this with different levels of knowledge. So if somebody says something that you disagree with, you are more than welcome to challenge that idea and have a conversation about it, as long as we're not jumping down each other's throats. And there are no silly or stupid questions, well when intentioned. Again, we are dealing with some very sensitive subjects here, and we are encouraging you to use us and use this space as a place where you can ask those questions that you've been sitting on, that you haven't felt comfortable asking. As long as they are coming from a place of wanting to understand, every question is welcome. Do we have any questions or comments about these ground rules? Feel free to just turn your mic on if you do. All right, and we are going to move on. So we are going to start by introducing the genderbread person. And at this point, I'd like to invite everyone, if you have one handy, to grab a piece of scrap paper or an iPad or just like anything where you can just doodle. It doesn't have to be nice. And feel free to draw an outline of this genderbread person. This is a tool that we are going to use to break down some different concepts and invite you to put your own experiences and identities on it. Nobody's going to be required to share these. You will be invited to share them, but no one has to. It's obviously very personal information. So we're going to use the genderbread person as we dive into our vocabulary section.
And really, it's not, no one's going to be judging your art. For instance, here is mine. I hope you can see it. I hope it's not blurring too much.
Blurring.
Okay. I'm going to turn off blur my background. You're going to get to see the wall of my home. But yeah, so, you know, it's not, the art is not the important part. Although if you want to make it beautiful, make it beautiful. Actually, side note, I just want to thank Joel for putting in his own introduction in the chat. Anyone, if you feel moved to, you can. And Cindy has put in a link about the indigenous land and finding out whose ancestral land you're on in the chat. Oh, and last thing to clock, I forgot to say this. We will have a bio break, but if you do need to like go take care of yourself at any time, please do. You're welcome to do that. Genderbread person. Okay, I'm ready, Rachel. I'm ready.
All right, so we're going to jump into our first category, which is biological sex, which is adorably at the crotch of the genderbread person. And you'll be prompted when it's time to label your cookie. So sex is the label that you were assigned at birth based on the genitals you were born with and the chromosomes you have. There are more than 2 of these. Your sex equals biology. Also, the one other thing I forgot to mention, these slides will be sent out via email. So I don't want anyone to feel pressured to take notes and get this all down. We might move through it kind of quickly, but we will be collecting emails at the end so that we can send people our vocabulary. All right, moving on. Intersex is a term used to describe when someone is born with the sexual biology that is outside of the strict boxes of male or female. It could be because of genitals, internal organs, chromosomes, hormones. There's many, many different ways that a body could be intersex. And approximately 1.7% of the population is intersex, which is about the same percentage as people with red hair. We love a fun fact here at GenderWise. AFAB and AMAB are shortened acronyms for assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And now you can add your sex to your genderbread person. Some possible terms that you might use are AMAB and AFAB, male, female, or intersex. We'll give everyone a second to label their cookie.
And as always, if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute. I'm also keeping an eye on the chat, so questions at any time, more than welcome.
All right, moving on. So now we are going to talk about the concept of gender, and we're going to break it down into 2 parts, which are identity and expression. And we are going to start with identity, and it's pointing at the brain. So gender is a social and legal status. It's a set of expectations from society about behaviors and characteristics. Gender identity is a person's internal sense of their own gender. So it may be different from a person's physiology or assigned sex at birth. Everybody has a gender identity. Cisgender, or cis, is an adjective describing a person whose gender identity corresponds to their assigned sex at birth. So say a baby is born, the doctor says, looks like a girl to me. The person grows up and says, yeah, no, I'm a girl, that checks out. That is a cisgender girl.
Can I add my fun Latin fact, Rachel?
It's on the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Or wait, this one?
No, my fun Latin fact about cis. So
oh yes, please add your Latin fact.
Cis and trans both come from Latin. Cis means on the same side as. So it's like you're born on one side of gender. If you're thinking about a binary system, you stay on that side, you are on that same side. Thanks
I
for
love Latin here at GenderWise. Transgender is an adjective describing a person whose gender identity does not correspond to their assigned sex at birth. So fun fact. In Latin, trans can mean through, across, or beyond, which is an interesting way of looking at it, because I think some people look at transgender as a very binary thing, male to female and female to male, but it's actually much more expansive than that, which we will get into. Non-binary is a gender identity which describes a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or as a woman. Non-binary people may identify with being both a man or a woman, neither, or somewhere in the middle. And non-binary people may or may not identify as transgender. Pronouns. What are pronouns? Pronouns are a word that stands in for a proper noun, and a person's pronoun typically corresponds to their gender identity. Common pronoun sets include she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, theirs, and ze, here, hers. I know I say common, ze, here, hers is not particularly common. It's something that's known as a neopronoun. Neopronouns are something that came from a desire to have sets of pronouns that aren't attached traditionally to gender. And while they are less common, they do happen. I did not mean to go so fast, but moving on. Multiple pronoun usage. There are lots of people along the trans and gender nonconforming spectrum who opt to use more than one set of pronouns. That might mean that multiple sets of pronouns feel good for them. It might mean that they use one set of pronouns in some spaces and another set in another. And there's different ways that those might be introduced. So it might be Sam, she / they, or Mary, she, he, they, or Cam, all pronouns. It's best practice when you see that somebody uses multiple pronouns to alternate and use them all. For example, Mary said she is looking forward to the concert. They will meet you there. You can even use multiple sets in one sentence. Generally, we like to stay away from the term preferred pronouns, which we'll talk about later, but it generally implies that, you know, pronouns are a choice or an option. But when people use multiple pronouns, it is actually considered best practice to ask, do you have a preference between the set? Is there one that you like better or that feels better? So that is multiple pronoun usage. Do we have any questions on that? We usually have a couple people get stuck there. You good? All right, moving on. So now you can add your gender identity to your gender red person. Some possible terms, and this is a non-exhaustive list, are woman, man, non-binary, genderqueer, transgender. And as a reminder, this exists on a spectrum and can change at any time. I'll give everyone a moment. All right, moving on. So now we're going to talk about gender expression, which is on the cookie, it's the whole thing. So gender expression is the manner in which a person represents or expresses gender to others, often through behavior, clothing, hairstyles, activities, voice, mannerisms. It could also be someone's name, but it's what they show the world. Masculine and feminine. Masculine refers to a gender expression that aligns with cultural ideas of masculinity, and it can be shortened to masc. And feminine refers to a gender expression that aligns with cultural ideas of femininity and can be shortened to femme. So masculinity and femininity are things that we can all kind of define for ourselves. But when we talk about it in this instance, we're kind of thinking about what society expects from masculinity and what society expects from femininity.
Audrey, I see your question in the chat, and I'll just read it out for everyone. Are non-binary and non-gender conforming considered interchangeable expressions or terms? So
I love that question.
That is a great question. Non-binary is usually used to refer to identity, which we just talked about. It's like in your brain. And gender non-conforming usually refers to expression. So it is going to come up here. But that's one of the reasons that, for instance, in theater, you see TGNC, or trans and gender non-conforming people. So I think it's an attempt to bring in people who both might identify as trans or non-binary, and people who just don't fit it with the way they express themselves. This might get answered as we keep going through expression. So if it doesn't, we'll come back to it. And I also see this excellent question from Hunter, which I might just pin for when we get to the end of the genderbread person, because I think that might also, there might be more questions that come from that specifically.
Yeah.
But we got you.
I'm looking at your question and I love it, especially because I'm working with queer youth this summer. So we will definitely be getting to that. But for now, we're going to move on with vocabulary. Gender nonconforming is a term used to describe people whose gender expression differs from stereotypic expressions. Gender nonconforming individuals may identify as cis, trans, or anywhere on the spectrum, differs from non-binary, as this refers to expression, where non-binary refers to identity. So someone who's gender nonconforming can have any gender identity. They can, be something very binary. They can be non-binary, and vice versa, where someone who's non-binary can have a very femme aesthetic or a very masculine aesthetic, or be somewhere in the middle. So now we invite you to add your gender expression to your genderbread person. Some possible, but again, not exhaustive list of terms include feminine or femme, masculine or masc, gender nonconforming. And then we threw some other words at you, which you might have questions about. The list includes tomboy, butch, twink, dyke, androgynous. And as a reminder, just like identity, this is on a spectrum and can change at any time. And you can also use words that aren't on this list, and you're welcome to share those with us.
Rachel, what does the term twink mean?
We always get a question about twink. Twink is historically a slur. A lot of these are historically slurs that have been reclaimed. Twink typically refers to a more feminine appearing gay man, usually blonde. But it's very, it differs person to person and is used very casually. I've also been called a twink before, which I'm still trying to wrap my brain around.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. All right, moving on. So now we're going to talk briefly about attraction and sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is a person's emotional and sexual attraction to other people based on the gender of the other person. Your sexual orientation is not the same as your gender identity. Somebody can be trans and be straight. Somebody can be gay and be cis. They don't correlate. Shakespeare used the word twink. That's incredible. Shakespeare made everything. Also invented the word swagger. Okay. Gay. Gay is sometimes used as a catch-all to include everyone in the queer community. The real definition is a homosexual person, usually referring to a man. It is both an adjective and a noun. Queer is even more so used as a catch-all umbrella term to include many people, including people who don't identify exclusively as straight and or exclusively cis. This term was previously and still currently used as a slur, but is being reclaimed by many parts of the LGBTQ community. I use it almost exclusively as an umbrella term and to describe myself. Asexual is an orientation where someone experiences little to no sexual desire. Asexuality is very much experienced on a spectrum and varies from person to person. Pansexual is an orientation where someone's attraction has no basis in the gender of the other person. And now we would like to invite you to add your attraction to your genderbread person. Some potential terms, again, non-exhaustive list, are straight, gay, lesbian, queer, bisexual, asexual, pansexual. And of course, like everything else, this is fluid and can change at any time. And this is the point where we ask if anyone would like to volunteer sharing their genderbread person with the group. No one has to. I understand it's very personal. Anya will be sharing theirs, but now is the time for volunteers.
Mine. Here is my beautiful artwork. So My gender identity today is transgender. I kind of go between transgender and non-binary, but I'm feeling trans today. Um, my sex is female, and my gender expression is, I would say, mask of center. If there was an imaginary middle in our cultural division between gender, it would be on the mask side. Um, and I identify as queer. There
Thank
we
you,
go.
Anya.
You're
Would
welcome.
anyone else like to share theirs? Always hit or miss if we get someone who wants to share it. That's okay. Cool. Moving on. Did anyone discover anything different? Did anyone use a label that they weren't expecting? No worries. We all just know ourselves very well here. All right, so now we're going to jump into other vocab and best practices.
Rachel, I wonder if this might be also, when we get to it, a potential time to answer Hunter's question.
Right now? Yeah.
Oh no, I mean like when we get to the best practices with students.
Yes. Yes. Okay, cool. Transition. Transition is the process by which a person socially and or physically aligns their gender expression more closely to their actual gender identity and away from that associated with their sex assigned at birth. So this can include changing your name, changing your hair, changing your makeup routine, the way you dress, your pronouns. This does not necessarily include any kind of surgery or hormones, which is then referred to as a medical transition. At no point does a trans person need a medical transition to be valid in their transgenderness. And it is a very personal choice. The chat's blowing up, but it's hearts. Fantastic. I love that. TGNC is an umbrella acronym meaning trans and gender nonconforming. It's a term that we throw around a lot, so I wanted to make sure that we defined it. Dead name. Dead name is the name that a TGNC person was given at birth and no longer uses upon transitioning. Dead naming or using somebody's dead name is considered inappropriate and potentially harmful. Once you know that somebody changes their name, that is the only name that you should be using. Drag. Nobody ever knows what the definition of drag is, so we added it. Drag is just the performance of one or more genders theatrically. Drag kings perform masculinity, drag queens perform femininity. Both cis and trans and gender nonconforming folks can do drag, and it does not change their gender identity or pronouns. In fact, many drag performers use different pronouns when they're in and out of drag. The easiest example that we can use for everyone is RuPaul, who uses he, him pronouns when he's out of drag and she, her pronouns when she's in drag. Some gender neutral language alternatives. I know we're going to run through these fast, but just a reminder, these slides will be sent to you. Mix is a very common honorific that's used in place of Mr. or Mrs. I like to use it when I'm teaching. Teacher is another honorific that lots of gender nonconforming educators use. Nibbling is a word that's used in place of niece or nephew. Offspring, child, cub for son and daughter. They, them, theirs, and ze, her, hers in place of he or she. These pronouns are very much not a catch-all, and you should always check in with an individual on their pronouns if you're not sure. But in general, if you're not sure who you're talking about, go they, them until you know. Folks, friends, everyone, students, y'all are some group calls that you can use in place of boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. There's a hot debate on if guys is a gendered term or not. People often ask us if they should use the word guys, and it's complicated because it doesn't bother most people, but it does bother some.
Actually, wondering if any of y'all have words that you use for like groups that we might not know. I'm always in search of some hot new ways of saying like everyone. Oh yeah, I see a hand. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I usually specify it to the group that I'm working with. So if I'm teaching an acting class, I address my students as, hey, actors.
I love that.
If I'm teaching, when I teach my movement class, I say, good morning, my movers.
Nice.
Nice.
It's like you can turn the verb into the noun.
Yep.
I like that. I also saw the question From Stacy, I love nibbling. Oh, little birds. Oh, little birds. You could just call them little birds. Oh, I love that too. I mean, so I should say the reason we have cub in this slide is because I had a very long conversation with my parents and my dad about like what to refer to me as instead of their daughter. And we landed on cub, which I love. Um, the animal kingdom, so many options. Stacy also said, I love nibbling. I've been looking for that word. Is there a gender neutral alternative for uncle or aunt? And I replied, I've heard nuncle, which I like. I think some people are like, that's so weird.
Not a fan.
Cool cats. Right. Friends. Yes, Kate, I've also used friends a lot. It's friendly. It's nice. Thank you for all of these beautiful group terms. Little birds. Ah,
Amazing.
I can't. Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on.
This is a list of questions that I took from, I believe, the Human Rights Campaign. It was either Human Rights Campaign or the Trevor Project, but I can double check. But this is a list that is suggested to give students when a new class starts. So what pronouns would you like us to use for you in this classroom? What name would you like to be called in this class? What name/pronouns would you like me to use with your parents or guardians? And what name do I have for you on the school roster? That last question is a little complicated because it sometimes does include asking someone to disclose a dead name, but we also have to be reasonable in the fact that we often work with minors who cannot legally change their names yet and do have legal names. This is one of those situations where sometimes the dead names do need to quietly come out, which kids are usually very used to when they're in school settings. But these are some common questions that we recommend asking when you start a class. But then Hunter also asked about, and what name would you like me to list in the program? Yes, especially if you're working with performers, what name would you like me to list in the program is a great one, because you have to remind kids that, this is what your friends are going to see, but it's also what your parents are going to see. Because we're all trying to keep kids safe right now. And then going back to Hunter's question, in terms of pronouns with other students and changing at any time, do you have recommendations or tips for those of us who are teachers to keep track of pronouns for students? I asked at the beginning of the year, but find out partway through the year that a student has made a change. Do I ask the entire class again? Do I announce that publicly or let the student do so? Great question. I am currently working at a summer camp for trans kids, and these pronouns are changing every day. It all depends on the precedent that you set in your classroom. So you can say at the beginning, we're going to go through our pronouns, and if they change, let me know or talk to me. In terms of, do I ask the entire class again? Do I announce that publicly or let the student do so? That should be the student's choice. If a student comes to you and says, hey, I know I was using these pronouns, but now I'm using these, you can follow up with, great, how do you want that communicated? Give the agency to the person in question. And in terms of just trying to keep track, I don't know if in your classrooms you have places where students' names are on their desks or something. I recommend whiteboards where students can edit them, something that's not very permanent. But just creating a culture where students know that they can come to you and let you know that their pronouns change goes a very long way. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Absolutely, thank you.
Of course.
And I'll say, in a situation where you might, I don't know if all of you teach, multiple classes a week, or if you have the same students. When I teach at the Ali Forney Center, we usually just start the day by being like, if we're doing an intro, just to say, and use whatever name you're using today, like whoever you are today, you can bring that to the space. And that's in a very specific context of it is exclusively queer and trans people, and I only see them once a week. So it really can change pretty drastically. But I do think it's that same thing of the precedent of come into the space as you are, and that is always going to be fine, is really powerful to set.
Yeah.
Oh,
I definitely. Yeah,
I see some hands, and then Elizabeth also. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, I had a question, not a question. maybe a question. There's something in that. I'm doing summer camps right now. I do check-ins where we say our name for the day and our pronouns of the day at the beginning. It's great. And so we get kind of that vibe where if something's changing, it's totally fine. Any ideas? I'm in Arkansas, y'all. And any ideas of how to deal with the kid that's like, okay, so typically if a kid says any pronouns, great. I'm totally accepting of that and I'm going to roll with that. But I have kids that say any pronouns to be, it's like malicious or it's attacking, or they'll say it, or like they're using things that are not appropriate. And I know they're doing it for like a malicious intent. Not maybe I'm thinking too much into it.
They're
but like,
making a joke of it.
they're making a joke. Thank you. That's exactly.
Yeah.
So any ideas on how to respond in that moment?
Best
I've tried lots of
practice-
different things. I've started using it as their pronouns, which just feels gross. I don't like that. So anyway, just asking that.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. First of all, I have known people who use it as their chosen pronouns. So it does happen. Especially with kids, I would recommend, even if you know they're joking, even if you know that they're just being little jerks, run with it. If they say all pronouns, use all pronouns. If they say it, use it. They will eventually get exhausted with the joke. But it's still showing the students who need to see it that you are going to respect their pronouns no matter what.
Thanks.
Of course. And Elizabeth, did you have a question also?
Oh, no, just to when my kids come into my room, I have them just sign in on the whiteboard and they just literally write the name that they are feeling that day. In response to Chad's question, which is, I think, such an important one. I don't know. I had a kid a couple of years ago who came in and asked to be called by a different name. And I said, great. And another teacher came up to me later and said, yeah, like, he's just doing it for a joke. And I kind of was like, I don't really care. Like, if someone's going to ask me to call them by that's fine.
Yeah.
So I thank you for that.
There also might be cases where you think they're joking and they're not. There's a kid in my camp who's been using pretzel as as pretzel's pronouns for a year and a half now. And I don't understand it, but I see how far respecting it goes with this kid. So a big, if you take one lesson away from this, it's that you don't have to understand something to respect it. Hunter.
Yes, one more question. So I have a student I've had a couple years in a row. We have a good relationship. And I've noticed that they don't like to choose a pronoun, right? So they almost get flustered. And I know that I'm saying they, because I know they would say, okay, probably they, them. So I'm just curious if you have any advice, like, is it putting students on the spot? Is it making them anxious to do what we all do, which is say, name and pronoun, or is that just something that they're going to have to struggle with? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. A little of both. A little of both sides of the coin. It is something that they're eventually going to have to deal with. There are people out there who prefer to not use pronouns and will say, just refer to me by my name. And just calling them by their name, even though it feels a little weird and robot-y, might be the best option for that student until they figure it out on their own. Anya, do you have anything to add to that?
I think depending on the group of students and how much exposure they've had to like different combinations of pronouns, it might be helpful to also offer that people can use multiple pronouns if you think that might be what they're struggling with. I mean, I've definitely been in spaces. I just remember one particular sixth grader who, after hearing me use my pronouns, like later came up to me and was like, can I use they, them pronouns? And like, I actually think that maybe that student had never been exposed to it before. And then started playing with using she, they sometimes. So like, it was an interesting, it's like it's hard to tell what exactly the root of the hesitation might be.
Thank you.
And you can always preface going, like if you're doing we're going to go around the room and say our names and pronouns or something like that, you can always say, and share your pronouns if you feel comfortable doing so. And then you can always, if someone opts out, you can always pull them aside after and be like, do you know how you would like to be referred to? So that you know.
I will say I've seen more and more people use name and pronouns if you'd like to share them, which is a choice, right? Like it gives people the option to share them if they want to. I feel a little mixed about it because I think that it does put a little bit more pressure on people who are using pronouns that people might not expect for them. So I still prefer to have everyone say name and pronouns, but that is a preference, and I've now seen more and more people doing that as an option.
All right, moving on. These are a few terms that we recommend avoiding that people don't usually understand why. So the reason we suggest avoiding identifies, like if you say they identify as transgender or they identify as a girl or they identify as a boy, it kind of undercuts what it means. Because if it's not terminology that you would use for a cis person, it shouldn't be language that we're using for a trans person. If someone's a girl, they're a girl, whether they're trans or cis. With prefers, when people say, these are my preferred pronouns, or what do you prefer? What name do you prefer I use for you? Prefer implies that there's a choice. And while this is my preference, it's not mandatory. Pronouns and chosen names are very much mandatory. So getting that language out of our daily vernacular kind of reinforces the severity of it. And then used to be is something that we're also discouraging. When you say somebody used to be a boy or somebody used to be a girl, or someone used to use this name, that person never used to be a boy or used to be a girl. They were socialized as one, but they've always been the gender identity that they know they are. They just maybe weren't born in that body and weren't called that, but they were. Yeah, Stacy.
Yeah, I had a quick question because we try really hard in our company to give agency to everyone to express themselves, how they want to be represented. And we often use the term self-identified so that it indicate, because when we do things for grants, we want it really clear to our grantors and our funders and whoever's that this is not what I said they are, it's what they've indicated. So we use the word self-identified. Can you elaborate on the identifies as? Because I was like, ooh.
Yeah. The identifies as thing is a little tricky because it depends on context. If you're talking about like a group that includes cis and trans people, like if you're saying we like a self-identified group of women, that's different than women and trans people who identify as women. It's not othering because it's including the whole group of women as opposed to isolating trans people. We're more talking about individual circumstances where you're talking about one person who identifies as, because you just have to ask yourself, would I be saying this if this person were cis? But it's less about talking about groups. Does that make sense?
It does. It's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Of course. Yeah. So we're not saying never to use the word identifies as, it's more case by case and think about why you're saying it.
And it's usually when you're talking about other people. Like I often say I identify as queer, and that's partly to clock that I have previously identified as bisexual. Like, that like at this moment I identify as this, but like, those things are fluid. Chad.
Sorry. Can I ask? So this is, I think it's also in this like, sorry, identifying is the word that I'm coming back to. Let me get to my actual sentence. I'm thinking about it in like casting things where you're like, I want a female, like we are looking for a female for that, but I want to make sure that a person who is trans feels that they can still audition for that role. It
Yeah.
like, and then I also run a program that's specifically for women. And so we used to use the language female identifying, and then we were like, that's dumb. Women are women, right? Like if you're a woman, you're a woman, fine. But again, wanting to make sure that people that language feels that it's inclusive. So
This is another one of those situations where identifying is fine. It's it's the it's the singling out of people that we're trying to move away from when we're talking about individual people and saying they identify as, because then it's undercutting. But the way that you're explaining using it, like we're looking for a female identifying actor, that is totally fine and more inclusive, because you're saying any female, because I'm sure lots of female actors are looking at listings and saying, oh, I'm sure that doesn't mean me. So the way that you're using it is more inclusive. The ways that we're saying to avoid are the more exclusive, nitpicky, othering ways. It's a confusing one.
So sorry, just gonna go to Hunter's question and then go back, because I think casting is so hard. Okay. So your suggestion, instead of introduce yourself by the name you want to be called and preferred pronouns, yeah, I would just shorten it to name and pronouns. Introduce your name and pronouns is what I would, that's what I say.
Yeah, exactly.
Casting is really tricky. I think my instinct is something along the lines of, this character is X. If you feel like you want to play that role, feel free to audition. You know, I'm just like, it's almost.
Yeah. You could even just say looking for female actors who, and then have a statement somewhere on the casting listing saying that you're, you know, casting regardless of if someone is cis or trans, just so that they know right off the bat that they're welcome to audition for the correct roles.
That's kind of the way that we've gone with things, but just it sometimes is clunky and feels,
yeah,
I don't know. It felt like it was I don't know, over, like too much, right? I don't know. But thank you. That's great.
Yeah, of course. If you still feel like you're struggling with this at the end of the workshop, we can connect via email and help you come up with phrasing.
Yeah, because it really is tricky, because the system is so specific about how things are normally done that I think if you're doing something like outside of that, it's really like, anyway, it's a movement, theater. Okay, let's keep going.
I also want to point out what Hunter just put in the chat, that she has them fill out a form and check, I'm comfortable playing femme characters or masculine characters. I love that.
Yeah, and just bearing in mind, there was, you know, Hunter, I think you brought up Shakespeare earlier. It's like, there are so many characters that don't have to be any gender. It's like, is this intrinsic to the character? Anyway, thank you. We will keep going. Feel free to keep asking questions. We have 25 minutes. Okay.
Just some reminders. So this first one is New York specific, but it's nice to keep in mind if you're working in other states. So according to DASA, which is the Dignity for All Students Act, it is illegal to refer to, discriminate against, and even group students by gender. So saying like, all right, playing dodgeball, girls over here, boys over there, that's technically illegal in New York State. Most teachers don't know that or enforce it, but it is very much illegal. And it's also just not great, because there may be people in your classroom who are not boys or girls, and they are going to feel like they have to force themselves into one of those boxes. Offering your own pronouns creates a sense of normalcy and invites others to do the same unprompted. So when you're starting a new class, if you're a teaching artist who does a lot of residencies, or just in any situation, just say, hey, my name's blah, blah, blah. I use these pronouns. It helps normalize it for people who use alternate pronouns that you might not expect to share theirs and not feel like they're constantly outing themselves. And something that we've said a million times already is that both gender identity and expression are fluid and can change at any time.
Can I add a caveat? I would not a caveat, I'd like addendum,
Yes.
which is that
I'll allow it.
Thank you. If you are working in a space with someone who uses pronouns that are not being used, which happens to me a lot working in classrooms, it can be useful to ask the person how they feel about that. Like conversations that I have with my teaching artist partners, and this can be true for students too, is that they'll often ask me like, "Hey, I notice you're being misgendered. Like, how can I support you?" Or like, "Do you want me to correct people?" And I think I'm saying that partly because it really depends on the person. Um, and something that I'm trying to gauge for myself, because I think it can be a learning moment for students, but I also realize that I'm in spaces where sometimes this is the first time they may have heard the they them pronouns used at all. So it's really just an encouragement of like, if you notice someone being misgendered, it is lovely to check in with them and see how they want to be supported. Um, and then you can do that. And that's really nice. Let me tell you. It's just
Goes a
nice.
very long way.
Yeah. Anyway, addendum over. Rachel.
Thank you. So now we're going to jump into our gallery walk. This is just a collection of photos and pronouns of people who are somewhere on the trans and gender nonconforming spectrum. It usually, when we do this workshop, plays with music, but my Spotify won't open. So it'll be quiet, but it's not very long. It's only about a minute. It's a combination of people that we know, and it's also some celebrities. So you might recognize some people, especially if you watch Pose. So we will jump into this. If anyone wants to sing right now, that'd be great. I don't know what's wrong with my Spotify app. Great. So before we get into this brainstorm, that was the gallery walk. It is way more fun with music. But the reason that we do the gallery walk is to just show that there are a million different ways to appear trans or gender nonconforming, and certain pronoun sets might not, be matched up with what you would expect. And it was also just our little moment of queer joy. Normally at this part of the workshop, when we do it, when we are contracted to do it, our workshop is usually longer. It's usually an hour and a half to 2 hours. At this point, we would do an interactive role play where you work with different characters to work through a misgendering. Because we don't have the time for that, we're taking a slightly different route. Anya, would you like to take over?
First, I just want to check in and see how we're feeling about taking a bio break. Because normally in the longer workshop, this is also where we're like, take 5 minutes, get some water, stretch. But I feel like the conversation has been rich. I don't want to like be like, and now we go away. Can I get some like gauge in the, just maybe say in the chat if you want to take a bio break. It's like,
We have
how do
about 20 minutes left.
Yeah. Keep going, says Laura. Okay. Yep. So it's fine either way. Keep going. Okay.
Great.
Cool. We will keep going. And if you need to step away, step away. It's your life. You have your needs. Fantastic. Okay. So we're gonna have a little group brainstorm. Why are pronouns important? Imagine that you need to explain this to somebody. What would you say? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat, you can take a second, however you want to respond. We're just gonna do a little group brainstorm. No bad answers, just answers.
One thing I would say is that language has a way of like speaking a vision into reality. And so if you're being faced with a vision of yourself and that's the language that's constantly around you, it's sort of hard to break past that to get to the other thing you might want to explore. So trying to actively like build a space in which you can explore is helpful, and that requires other people to gift you that language back.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Hate when we speak in unison. Thank you, Alex.
Mm.
I talk a lot with young actors about who their character is as opposed to who they are, and sort of looking at pronouns as a piece of that. Who am I? In order to know who my character is, it's helpful to know who I am as well. And when I quote unquote step into character or go into character, this is where I'm going. So I think especially in a group of actors or cast members, sort of tying it to the work that we're doing, I've found is helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. We'll
I
have a, oh, go ahead, Anya.
did it again, exact same time. I would also add just respect, that pronouns show respect to people, our way of showing that you respect what they want to be called. Just like having a name, I think sometimes comparing it to a name can be helpful too. Um, and people change their names sometimes when they feel like names aren't right for them, and then yeah. Also, so Hunter said respect and honor, just like calling someone their name and pronouncing it correctly. Yes, that's there we go. Exactly that. Kate, I noticed you unmuted yourself if you wanted to add something.
I was going to say sometimes people's gender expression does not, according to the social construct, match their gender identity. So knowing their pronouns shows that you respect what you're just saying, their identity, and honor their identity, even if they present as something that may appear different from what they identify as.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. We're going to have a couple practice rounds where we're going to invite you to mute yourselves and practice talking. In person, this would be a turn and talk to your neighbor, but instead it's going to be a, mute yourself and talk to your reflection. So our first mute and practice, Anya, would you like to read it? I realize I'm talking way too much.
Robin is a student in your class who uses they, them pronouns. Practice talking to a colleague about Robin's progress while using their pronouns. Ooh, what a fun little task. So for instance, Rachel, oh my gosh, Robin, they're doing so well. They're really showing that they want a role in the school play, and I'm really excited for whatever they want to audition for. I think they would be super great in anything that has singing, because wow, is their voice amazing.
Their voice is incredible. I think that there's a couple of roles that they would be absolutely perfect for.
All right. So you take your little 30 seconds to a minute, just practicing using some they, them pronouns in your own space. Then we'll call you back. Okay, I'm gonna gently call us back, talking to our imaginary friends. Or real colleagues in our minds.
Or
Actually,
someone else in the room with you.
someone else in the room. I don't know who's there. Rachel, actually, could you go back to the other slide? I wonder if anyone wants to practice out
there.
loud with another human on Zoom. Or even just, you know what, if you want to just say something great about Robin, and we can all just give Robin and you some snaps. If anyone feels like unmuting and just Robin.
Robin did a great job the other day at rehearsal because they usually are a little bit lost in their blocking, and they took the initiative to go up to our student stage manager, ask about the blocking, and they had it recorded in their script and ready to go for the top of our review.
Oh, yes,
Get
Robin.
it, Robin.
Snaps for Robin.
Robin's the best. Thank you, Alex.
Anyone else? I know Robin's really been like impressing us all recently.
Elizabeth?
Robin lost their keys as they were leaving rehearsal the other day, but it was super, I loved it because they felt comfortable coming and saying, yo, I lost my keys, Dr. P, can you help? And I was like, yes, Robin, I can absolutely help. And getting them to their keys was much easier than it would have been a month ago.
Robin is always losing their stuff. Can confirm.
Robin, seriously? Yeah.
Amazing. All right, we have another one.
A little more complicated. Mutant practice number 2. Pretend you are talking to a parent who's concerned about the gender inclusive practices in your educational space. Explain what pronouns are and why they are important. Feel free to choose a specific age group or adults that you work with. So, for instance, I'd be more likely to talk to administrators, but if someone was like, you've been introducing pronouns, we don't do that here, or something, I'd probably just say something like, thank you so much for letting me know what the practices in your school currently are. I have found that I work with a lot of students who appreciate hearing people's pronouns, and I appreciate hearing people's pronouns. And it's a way that I like to help students feel comfortable with myself and with each other. For example. Okay, take a minute. And yeah, mutant practice. Have a little play. And we're gonna aim to share some of these as well. So if you are like, ooh, I have questions, or you want to take notes on what you were saying, feel free.
All right. Wrapping up those final thoughts. And any volunteers to share back the conversation that you just had with the voices in your head?
Okay, I'll try. This one feels harder.
Totally. And you know what?
Exactly.
Snaps in advance. Snaps in advance,
Thank
because
you.
it is hard.
Parent conversation, always hard. Okay, so wait, what's the name again? Oh gosh.
We didn't even give one. We'll just keep talking about Robin.
Okay, Robin. Okay, So, hey, Robin is doing so great. And I just wanted to call you and let you know how much I enjoy having them in my class. And, um, well, that's right. Yes, I do use them for Robin because that's what they've asked me to use. And, right, I understand you typically use she, her. They did tell me that. And, in our acting classroom, we really try to create a safe space. And as a teacher, it's my job to respect and honor all my students. And I try to really hard to call them the name that they ask to be called, and that includes their pronoun.
Fantastic.
Snaps, because
That was
that
great.
feels like it wouldn't be an easy conversation.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yes.
Hunter. That was great.
Thanks.
Brave, very brave. Thank you.
Yeah, parents can be scary. Kate, was that your hand?
That was my hand. Yeah, this is my ideal conversation where they're just quiet and don't say while I deliver a lecture. I would say in order for a theater classroom to be successful, people have to be able to be vulnerable, to take risks. In order to do that, they need to feel safe in the space. A space isn't safe unless it is inclusive, and we look at all genders and gender expressions as an additive to our community. If we were to not honor people's pronouns or identities, that would be subtracting from the community that we've built here by excluding various people, and it would detract from the work we're trying to do and make it less successful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I definitely would say that flawlessly in the opposite situation.
Honestly, I was just like, when do I get to talk to administrators? But it's like we practice so that hopefully we can have those conversations more easily. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for bravery.
Hunter just put in the chat that you're so elegant, and I agree. That was very elegant and articulate, beautiful.
Anyone else? Okay. Yep. Elizabeth.
This is actually kind of based on an actual conversation I had a couple of years ago. So as you know, Robin missed class for a couple of days because of illness, but they're getting caught up in their work and they're being super proactive about coming to see me about getting that work made up. Yeah, I understand that I'm guessing it feels weird to you to hear Robin be addressed by they. But you know what? It's kind of like anything else. It's like a skill and it's a practice. I think it's okay to make mistakes. I don't do it perfect. I don't think anyone does it perfect. But the cool thing is that we're trying, right? And Robin hears us trying. So that's awesome.
Fantastic. That's so encouraging and so gentle. I thought that was lovely.
And I do think what people often get hung up on is being like, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all. And it's like, it is actually exactly what you say. I think it's the trying is what matters. And we need to forgive ourselves for making mistakes. Like, I make mistakes with people's pronouns. Like it happens, we make mistakes because it's new.
I misgender myself sometimes. We really make mistakes.
Yeah. And that's okay because we're all learning. I'm aware we have 6 more minutes, and I would like to take it to final questions, but I just want to check in and see if there's anyone who's like, I have this amazing thing that I worked on in my practice and I desperately want to share it. Now is your time. Okay, in that case, your practice is for yourself. Thank you everyone who shared. And we have these reflecting backs. Maybe we can send this and you can do this reflecting back on your own, and we can use this last 5 minutes for any final questions. Does that make sense since you're getting all these slides? The last throw on is, what questions do you have? And you can also screenshot this if you want to. Just so are there any questions? I know that Hunter, you said in the chat, and then also I'm seeing Kate, your hands up. Hunter.
I'll try to be quick. So, just as parent interactions are awkward, sometimes colleague to colleague interactions can be awkward in my world experience. So, hypothetically, imagine that you write letters to the seniors and teachers sign up for who to write a letter to, and one teacher knows the student as their dead name and is referring to them as their dead name. And let's say me, I'm trying to refer them to them as the name that they've asked to be called, and it gets really tricky. Or maybe it's a counselor or an administrator, and I guess it feels really hard to correct someone because you also don't want to out the student if they're only that way around you and in your class. Does that make sense? Or do you have any, or maybe somebody can ask it better? Okay.
Yes, in the best case scenario, I would ask the student before, well, it's tricky because it's like, I would probably ask the student first, if you think it's a scenario where they're not out to other people. If you think that it's likely that the other person knows but is dead naming them, I would say, oh, I'm not sure you know, but this student is this name. And yeah, having that conversation. That is an interesting scenario. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to those questions for a classroom or for a cast that we posted earlier, one of which is, what should I call you to your guardian? Because that's a good way of gauging how out the student or cast member or child in question is. In any case, if you think a student is using a chosen name and you think that there's a chance that you're going to be in communication with the parents or guardians, just ask the student, what does your family call you? Do they know you go by this name? Is it okay that, like, do you want them to know? Because in some cases, the student might be trying to keep it a secret, in which case they might not want you to be in the situation where they're saying, oh, blah, blah, blah goes by this name in my classroom. You just want to make sure, like, student safety is first priority because not every home is safe. Yeah, I would just say, when in doubt, ask the kid in question when you can.
Yeah, but lovely that your instinct is to be an ally and to have that conversation. Because, and I think sometimes, like, administrators especially just might not actually have contact with that child. And then it could also be another conversation of like, okay, you would like school staff to know, but you know, it's different with parents. And then that, you know, is also a different conversation.
Yeah.
And Kate, you also had a question.
Circling back to when you keep misgendering people accidentally, though your intention is to get it right. I'll just speak for myself and say, particularly when people present as a gender other than what they identify as, like, that is when I'm always messing up. And I can only apologize so many times, and I truly want to get it right. And I'm just wondering if there's any way, like, what, you know, it's that I'm of a different generation, so I didn't grow up, you know, using they, them with fellow students, etc. And so I'm just looking, I guess, for like ways to adjust my thinking to get it right, because I do want to get it right.
Yeah.
Well, it's always acceptable to use someone's name. If you know, I mean, as an intermediate step, like, my partner's parents just referred to me as my name. Still mostly just refer to me with my name. Fine. Also, I think even just the practice we were doing earlier of, like, if on your own time you have time to, like, associate that name with the pronouns in your head, because it is a practice, right? I mean, humans are great at pattern matching. We think we like to make assumptions, you know, we're social creatures, and it is an important practice to try to decouple this presentation means this pronoun means this identity, because I think increasingly that's not the case, especially for young people.
Yeah.
So it's just going to become more prevalent. Rachel, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. In addition to practice, I would just say to be very patient with yourself, because you are working hard to unlearn something that you've known to be one specific way for the majority of your life. So practice, correct yourself, apologize, but don't apologize so much that you're stressing out the person who's being apologized to. Just be patient and practice, because you're doing the work and that's what matters.
Also realizing we are now a minute over time, and I want to respect everyone's time, especially Cindy's, who is here as our facilitator. We do have some feedback forms in the chat. We will send out these slides. It sounds like we can.
Yeah, so the recording will be available on the website, or however it's going to be sent out after this. Any slides, Anya and Rachel, that you have, you can send to Alexis or me, and we can make sure it gets to the participants. So you will have access to this stuff as well. As Anya was saying, there's feedback forms for GenderWise and then also for AATE. And the next session is at 4:30. So thank you, Anya and Rachel, for this lovely session. I'm gonna leave the room open if you want to informally like close out, but it's, I guess, officially done. The time's
Okay.
officially done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
I'll stop.
have
Thank you
our-
all for coming.
Yeah, you have our email if you're like, I have a question.